All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're breaking down a viral idea that tries to make sense of a really weird contradiction in our economy. It's a concept called luxury poverty, and it starts with a question that, honestly, you've probably asked yourself before.
So let's just dive right into that central paradox, right? Why does it feel like getting the latest gadget, the coolest new phone, is totally within reach? But the basics, things like housing, healthcare, a decent education, those have become insanely expensive, almost impossible for a lot of people. It's a situation so common it's actually gotten its own name.
And this is what the source calls luxury poverty. It's this idea that we're living in a system where, yeah, you can get a new TV or some fancy clothes pretty easily, but just affording a place to live or paying for school can feel like climbing Mount Everest. So the big question is, how did we even get here? To figure that out, we've got to do what they always say. You have to follow the money. So let's take a look at the raw data, at the numbers, to really see the true scale of what we're talking about. And when you see it visually, it's pretty shocking. According to the source, in the United States, the top 1% of the population holds about 35% of the entire country's wealth. Now compare that to the entire bottom half of the country, 50% of the people, who altogether hold less than 4%. And believe it or not, the numbers get even more extreme when you zoom in on the very, very top. Get this, the top 0.1%, that's just 134,000 households, they control more than double the wealth of the entire bottom 50%, which is made up of 67 million households. That works out to an average net worth of $164 million for that top group, compared to just $147,000 for the bottom group. To really wrap our heads around the kind of wealth we're talking about, you have to understand the scale of a billion. It's not just a big number, it's 1,000 millions. Honestly, our brains aren't really built to understand a number that big, which makes it tough to really grasp the wealth that some single individuals have. And we are talking about figures way, way beyond a single billion. The source points to people like Jeff Bezos, worth $240 billion, or Elon Musk at $430 billion. To put that in perspective, that's $430,000 million. The source points out this is more money than they, their kids, their grandkids, and their great-grandkids could ever possibly spend in 1,000 lifetimes. So who cares, right? Why does this even matter? Well, the core argument here is that our economy needs money to move around, to circulate. When a very small group of people basically piles up and hoards wealth on this kind of epic scale, that money gets taken out of the active economy. It's not being used to build things or pay salaries, and that leaves less for everyone else to actually live on. Okay, so that's the what, this massive concentration of wealth at the very top. But how? How does a system like this actually work and keep itself going? Well, let's get into the theory behind it, according to the source. To make this all feel a bit more real, the video uses this really powerful analogy. Just imagine a super rich person goes and buys every single piece of food in an entire city. It's all perfectly legal. But of course, they can't possibly eat it all themselves. So while they sit on this mountain of rotten food, everyone else in the city starts to starve. And that just begs the question, even if something is legal, is it ethical? Should one person be allowed to hoard a resource that everyone else needs to survive? But, okay, if this is really what's happening with money, why aren't people more outraged? The source points to a really deep psychological reason, which is summed up perfectly in this famous quote from John Steinbeck. The idea is that the American dream narrative, that anyone can get rich if they just work hard enough, it convinces people to think of themselves not as being stuck, but as temporarily embarrassed millionaires who are just one big break away. And the source argues there's another huge factor that keeps this whole thing going: good old consumer debt. Easy access to credit, buy now, pay later, it all lets us live a lifestyle we can't really afford. I mean, if you've got the latest phone and nice clothes, you might not feel poor, right? It's a powerful distraction from what's really going on with your finances. The argument is that without this kind of debt distraction, people would feel the full weight of their financial reality, and they'd probably start demanding some big changes. This quote, and you might actually recognize it from the movie A Bug's Life, of all places, is used to perfectly illustrate this idea that the system kind of relies on the majority of people never realizing their own collective power. So we've gone through the numbers and the theory. Now let's bring all these big ideas down to earth and connect them directly to your life. What does the source say is the actual true cost of the system to the average person? Now, here's a really fundamental claim in this whole argument. nobody, and I mean nobody, becomes a billionaire just from their own personal hard work. Think about it. Giant companies like Amazon or Tesla, they depend on the combined work of hundreds of thousands of employees, from the top engineers all the way down to the delivery drivers and the janitors, to generate that incredible wealth. And this is where you can see a really fundamental clash of interests laid out plain and simple. On one side, you've got what the source says are the goals of the ultra-wealthy, things like lobbying for huge tax breaks or getting rid of regulations. And on the other side, you've got the needs of the public, things like well-funded schools, affordable housing, clean air. The argument is that these two lists are often in direct opposition to each other. And according to the source, this isn't just theory. This conflict has real direct consequences for all of us. When vast fortunes aren't taxed, it can lead to underfunded public services, schools, police, firefighters. It can mean the tax burden gets shifted down to the middle class. And at the end of the day, the argument is that this level of inequality makes society less stable for everyone, even for people who are well off. So all of this, the data, the theory, the impacts, it all builds to a final, really provocative conclusion. The source argues that to actually fix things, we first have to figure out what it calls the real dividing line in our society. The video makes a really bold claim here. It says that the political fights we see everywhere, the stuff that dominates the news, left versus right, and all these different social battles, that those are mostly just a distraction from the real conflict. So if that's the distraction, what's the real divide? According to this source, it's not simply rich versus poor. It is the ultra-rich, the handful of people with enough wealth to actually manipulate the economy and buy political influence, versus everyone else. And that everyone else includes the middle class and even people you'd consider rich, because they are all still playing in a system that's being shaped by that tiny group at the very top. And that brings us to the final question this Explain relieves us with, a question that kind of ties this entire idea together. Should the convenience of being able to buy dinner on credit distract you from the bigger picture, from the fact that for so many people, you now need credit just to eat? It's a pretty powerful question to think about.